Welcome to the Agile Talks, and we are online today. And again, we are with you. Also today, my guest speaker is Evan, who is the co-founder of Business Agility Institute. So before to introduce him, let me share the in November program. And in November, yeah, we have different type of topics, or we have different type of guest speakers. David Anderson will be with us, and he is the founder of Combine University, and John Kern, Erivan, and also the second round with Jeff Sutherland is the end of November. We will be online. So we are very excited today because we will discuss with Evan. So I want to invite him. Welcome, Evan.
Good morning or good evening for me. Good morning for you. How are you today?
Thank you, and you?
Keeping very well. Thank you very much.
So, are you ready for a bit challenging question?
Let's bring it on. Come on.
Okay. But as I said, always let's start with the easiest question. Who is Evan?
I'm not sure that's the easiest question. It's a very deep philosophical question sometimes. Evan Leybourn, I am based out of Melbourne, Australia. I have, for the last 5 years, been running the Business Agility Institute as one of the co-founders. My background has been business agility since about 2008. Prior to that, I was a techie and doing very traditional capital A Agile, data warehousing, business intelligence systems primarily. So I've been using Scrum and XP, FTD practices since about 2003. So that's sort of where the Agile side of me comes in. But personally, I want to see organizations be more humane. I want to see them be more human. I have a daughter who is currently 10, downstairs happily watching YouTube. But my mission in life is that the jobs that she has are better and more engaging, and she has more autonomy in her life than you or I did at the start of our careers.
I think that's a great answer. So let me continue with the second question. Always we are talking about Agile, also different type of Agile, Scrum, Kanban, Safe, different type of frameworks, tools, also toolkits. And as I know, in some companies saying business agility in just transform the business type, business teams. When they are doing a marketing team, also in the other business type of team, if they implement any safe, not safe, maybe Scrum or Kanban team, if they create, they are saying we are starting our business agility. But some of companies saying again, I think it's again the misunderstanding about the agility. They are saying they create some pilot teams. After they try to improve, also they try to create new teams. Yeah, we complete our pilot plot with Scrum or Kanban teams. Let's continue with business agility. What's mean? Create new teams. So in that area, I'm very excited to listen this question from your perspective. What is business agility? So let's let's answer.
That is a very good question. Now, before I answer that question, let me talk a little bit around, I suppose, my journey and the journey of many organizations towards business agility, because business agility is not agile, and business agility is not agile business. So that is, I think, where many organizations begin. It's all certainly where my career began in the business agility space. In 2008, I said that my business agility life started in 2008. In 2008, I became a director in the Australian Public Service. This was the first executive role that I had held. I had been a project manager, I had been a team leader, a scrum master, a developer. But suddenly I was in charge of a 8-figure government program, trying to like build systems and bring information together. But I wasn't a developer. I wasn't a project manager. I was a director. And for anyone who's listening, who's ever been or is currently an executive, you know that it is a fundamentally different skill set. It is not the, just because you're good at something doesn't mean that you're good at leading something. It doesn't mean that you're good at being a manager or an executive of that thing. And that was my mistake. I didn't realize that case. Now, after a few months, my boss took me to his office and it's like, look, Evan, if you want to be successful here, then, well, you have to get better. You have to like figure this out. Stop being so arrogant, figure out what it means to be a good leader. And that for me was a big motivating factor, because I don't see myself as overly arrogant, but that's how I was being perceived by others just because of the way that I suppose I was acting. Now, what does this have to do with business agility? I remember this moment. I literally remember it was a Saturday. I was walking down the Kingston shops in Canberra, and I remember the pebbles, the bricks on the footpath, on the sidewalk. And I just remember this moment. It's like, well, this agile thing that I'd been doing as a techie, as a team leader, maybe that would help me here as well. My problem is coordination, collaboration, getting a diverse group of, in my case, government agencies to collaborate rather than a diverse group of individual developers and like testers and developers and BAs and so forth. But it's like, maybe this agile thing will help me. Now, the good news for me certainly is that it did, but I suppose I also got lucky, because really what I was doing there was agile business. I was taking the practices, the values and the principles of the Agile Manifesto, certainly, but the practices and the approaches from Scrum, from XP, from feature-driven development into non-technology settings, into business settings, strategy, getting multiple government agencies to collaborate, all those kind of things. So I would advocate for things like pair work. Well, we need to write a minute to the minister. Well, why don't we pair on that rather than having one person write it? Right? This wasn't code. It wasn't pair programming, but it was exactly the same techniques. But I said I got lucky because after a few years, I left the public service and started doing this with more organizations. I realized that capital A Agile, whilst amazing with product development, and there are amazing techniques which can work, was not enough. Right? So Agile business, Agile outside IT, taking capital A Agile into other spaces, Agile marketing, Agile HR, Agile finance, Agile X, right, is good, but is insufficient, because like I think most of the people listening to this are probably aware, even in a technology space, doing Agile is not enough. You have to be Agile as well. You need agility. And so at a business context, when we're talking about an entire organization, this brings us to now business agility. Now, let me actually answer your question, because I actually have a very short answer.
Before the answer that question, maybe we have to go a bit deep about doing and being agile. What's their differences? You said being agile, agility.
So in one of the challenges with Agile, capital A Agile, in many organizations around the world, you've got practices like Scrum, practices like Kanban or XP, I'm dating myself there. You've got all of these amazing techniques, systems and frameworks and methods that technology teams, or in fact, really any team, but historically technology teams would use. Now, the problem is that Agile is a mindset more so than it is a way of working. So yes, you can do all of the things necessary for Scrum or Kanban, but unless you have that mindset of adaptability, customer centricity, listening to your customers, collaborating with others around the organization, the values and the principles of the manifesto, individuals' interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, unless you have those values as a mindset, right? Unless you are being agile, if you are just doing it, it is not sufficient because it will not be effective and you will probably fail.
Thank
How
you.
does that sound? It's been a while since I've had to define being versus doing, but so when we're talking about from a business standpoint, we're talking about business agility. We are talking about being agile in business, not necessarily, though, also doing some agile, but it is about being agile in a business. So we define business agility as a set of organizational behaviors, capabilities, and ways of working. It's not practices, it's not frameworks. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. If you act with agility, you have agility. So it's a set of behaviors, capabilities, and ways of working that affords your business the freedom, the flexibility, and the resilience to achieve your purpose. And here's the magic 6 words: no matter what the future brings. Right? That's business agility. If you can continue to achieve your purpose as an organization, continue to serve your customer, right? To meet the needs of the stakeholders and your customers and your employees, no matter what the future brings, a pandemic, a recession, a disruption, or just good things as well, new innovations, new ideas. If you're able to serve your customers, achieve that purpose, then you have business agility. Problem is that thousands upon thousands, millions upon millions of organizations around the world do not. And the world moves on. Their customers move on. And the organizations do not.
Great. Also, I have a question about Agile Manifesto. You mentioned the manifesto, and also some gurus or some thought leaders is saying, or some consultant companies are saying, if you follow the Agile Manifesto, you can achieve your Agile mindset. What do you think about that part? Because in last week we discussed with Jeff Sutherland, and he said me the manifesto is right for software companies, also the software industry. So he created the Scrumming because of this reason, to go with business side. So what do you think about Agile Manifesto? Is it enough to be agile part, or do we need to add new practices, not practices, new mindset, new principles, or behaviors?
So the answer is both. So first of all, there is no manifesto for business agility. Right?
Why?
There.
Maybe you can answer that. Why? Maybe you can answer that question.
Because the Agile Manifesto suits our purposes for now, to be honest. Right? Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Yeah. Whether you're finance or HR, marketing, whether you're building an organizational strategy or developing a new product, that is a pretty good value to live as an organization. It's not saying processes and tools aren't worthwhile, right? It's the items on the left are more important than the items on the right. Now, you still need processes and tools in finance, in marketing, in HR, but individual interactions are more important. Now, sure, like working software is perhaps less appropriate when you're talking about finance, but maybe let's replace the word software with working products and services, working stuff, right? Over comprehensive documentation. Again, if I spent 6 months documenting the budget rather than making a budget, if I spent 3 months documenting HR policies and procedures rather than actually enacting good DE&I policies, good onboarding processes, then, well, that's perhaps a waste of my time. Maybe there are other things that we can do. So the Agile Manifesto replaced the word software with like stuff. And you know what? It's pretty damn good. So the reason why I said it's both is that I'm not foolish enough to assume that the Agile Manifesto, a document that was written 20 years ago, 21 years ago, is forever, sacrosanct, bulletproof. All things change. All things need to improve. Are there improvements to be made to the Agile Manifesto? Absolutely. Right? Are there new cultural nuances to be applied? Absolutely. Right? 20-odd middle-aged white men in America, perhaps not the most representative of a global space adopting these ideals around the world. I was in Africa just before the pandemic in Nigeria talking with our communities there. And there was this amazing talk about African agility. What does agility look like in an African context, in an African culture? Because it is very different to an American culture. Now, I'm obviously not African, so I don't have those cultural contexts, but that's my point. A manifesto probably needs to evolve, as old things do. I don't know how. I don't think I'm the right person to do that. I do think, however, that if we're talking about business agility and we're talking about organizations in the world today, for us to spend a year creating a business agility manifesto is just noise. I have other things to do, like building behavioral models on business agility, like getting just inspiring organizations to think bigger about agility than just their software teams. And I don't need a new manifesto to do that. So that's one of the reasons why we've not gone down this path. I'm quite happy with what it is. It will evolve and it should evolve, but how? That's for smarter people than me to figure out.
Okay, and we will talk about that behaviors in next maybe minutes. But now I have different question. You said lots of companies fail about their transformation. Why? What's the top reasons?
So what I said was actually organizations fail in business, not necessarily
Okay,
fail their transformations. But you're also true there. So let me address both. Right? So in terms of organizations failing in business, I'm going to say something perhaps a little controversial, and that is all things die. An organization has to earn the right to exist. Their customers are their lifeblood. And an organization who doesn't look after their customers, doesn't meet the new needs of their customers, unfortunately, will end. That will be the end. But all things end. That is the nature of life. That's the nature of us as humans and as of businesses. And like as I'm getting older and I have to take different care of my body than I did when I was 20, so do companies as they get older, as the world changes around them. Do they need to take better care of themselves or different care of themselves than maybe they have in the past? They need to adopt agility. They need to be more like, no, they do need to respect who their customers are today rather than who their customers are or were yesterday, because it's changing. And that's why organizations, some of them really struggle. And you've got the famous examples, like Kodak invented the digital camera, right? Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix. Both organizations, and for the same reason, they failed, right? They thought that their customer of the day was their customer of the future. And their customer of the future said, no, that's not what we want. So the organization didn't keep up with what their customers truly wanted and where their customers were going. And so that's the failure of organizations. That's where they end. And that's the right thing. Not everything lives forever. The individuals in those organizations will find new jobs. All right. Yes, some people will lose some money. All right. And again, the cycle of life. Transformations themselves, however, so those organizations who want to be agile, those organizations who want to try new things, to survive, to experiment, right, have so many roadblocks along the way, right? And we know from our research that to reach a stable point in a transformation, in fact, there are two stable points. One at about 2 years, which is where leadership and let's call them soft behaviors start to get established. So empowerment, better delegation, building engagement, engaging teams, and like building greater engagement with employees, being more customer centric. These kind of soft human behaviors in an organization, after about 2 years, become relatively established. So an organization that stops their transformation at, say, 3-4 years is going to roll back, but they'll roll back to where they were at about 2 years. They're not going to roll back to zero. Right? An organization that stops at about 1 year is going to roll back to zero. The second plateau is at 8 years on average. Some organizations never reach that point ever, right? But on average at about 8 years. And this is where the governance behaviors, the systems behaviors of the organizations start to change and become, these new behaviors become established. So this is where decisions get based on trust and audit rather than approval. This is where incentives and rewards move towards team-based incentives and rewards rather than individual-based incentives and rewards. This is where organizations, their strategic planning mechanisms move towards adaptive strategy, emergent strategy rather than the annual plan, where their funding models shift from an annualized budget to quarterly budgets or rolling budgets or adaptive finance. Again, 1,000 different ways of achieving agility. If they're behaving with agility, they have it. But these systemic governance-oriented behaviors, they're the ones that after this second plateau at about 8 years become established. The reason why so many organizations, and I'm talking large established organizations over 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, the reasons why their transformation fail is because they don't have the courage to make the necessary changes, right? They go to a certain point and they go, all right, the rest of this is too hard. We've got enough. But the problem is, like I said, it rolls back. Right? So they get to this point where they think they've got this decent level of agility. And while they're pushing hard while this transformation is pushing, yeah, they have a decent level of agility across the organization. But then they say, all right, we're done. Right? 3 years in, 4 years in, 5 years in. But they haven't changed their governance systems. They haven't changed their funding models. They haven't changed their incentive schemes. They haven't changed their strategic planning. They haven't changed their whatever. Sure, they've maybe adopted squads and bloody tribes, but they haven't made the substantive changes necessary across the organization to actually be agile, not just do it. And so when the transformation ends, right, when all those coaches get redeployed, right, get taken and find other jobs in other organizations, they roll back. And they roll back to where they were at about 2 years. Right? They won't roll back to zero, but it doesn't stick because they didn't do what's necessary to make it stick. There are really good examples. Suncor in Australia was back in about 2008, 2009, the poster child for what we would now call business agility. I did a case study on them back in 2010 10, I think it was, on their audit function, right? So Agile in audit. Now, this is Agile business rather than business agility, but this is what they were doing. This was 14, 15 years ago, right? Change of CEO, change of CIO, right? The pressure to move them forward got released and they rolled back, like they all do, right? Because they hadn't reached that second sustainable point, right? I think they were probably pretty close, and that's the shame. I think another year or two, and even with a change of CEO, even with a change of CIO, the behaviors would have been established across the organization, but they let it go. And Suncor is just, it's a memory when it comes to agility or business agility. Now, like, they're actually working on it again, but they would have been, like, we wouldn't have been talking about the Spotify model, or we wouldn't have been talking about the ING, whatever it is. We'd be talking about Suncor because they were first, but they let it go. And this is true of how organizations work around the world. Change, systemic organizational change requires systemic organizational change. Just because you change one function, just because you change a bunch of processes, doesn't mean you've changed an organization.
I think that's a great point. Let's talk about this point, system thinking. Or, for example, in a lot of company, they are blaming Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, or leaders, or another type of managers. The problem is on you because we cannot transform because you are pushing for us, or our leadership is bad, or our Agile coach doesn't work well. So Scrum is not fitting with us. So in that cases, I'm the same point with you. We have to change the system, not people. If we have to trust people, and after that we have to try to change system. After that, the behaviors will change. So what do you think about that parts? And can we go a bit deep about this systemic changing? Do you have any examples to change the system and it affects the human or employer behaviors?
Yes. So humans. So okay. There's a lot to unpack there. So let me play devil's advocate for 1 second. No. Yes, Scrum might not work in that setting. Yes, the Agile coaches may not have the skills necessary to make an organizational change. It's yes, they may have brought in a consulting firm that is trying to install what worked with a different organization, but it's not going to work here. Just because it worked for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So they might be right in the same way that a broken clock is right twice a day. And the reason they might be right is exactly about the question. Because an organization is a complex adaptive system. Now, what does that mean? A complex adaptive system, you cannot create a framework for that. I cannot tell you how to do business agility in your organization because your organization is different to my organization, fundamentally. A process is a simple or a complicated system, like Cynefin, if folk are familiar with complexity theory or things like Cynefin. A process is simple or complicated, which means cause and effect are predictable and known, or at least knowable. Right? I know that if I do this, something is going to happen. In a process, the marketing process, the software development process, the budgeting process, I do some work and something will come out the end. Right? The thing about a process is because they're repeatable, predictable, documentable, right? I can define a framework for that. And I can take it from one organization to another because your budgeting process, your marketing process, your software development process is probably pretty similar to mine. So if my process is better, like I'm using Scrum rather than a waterfall approach, then you can take my process and you can apply my process in your organization. You got to change the hooks and make it work within your context. But I can document that. I can copy it. I can bring it across. Now, I'm being very simplistic here. Obviously, reality is much more complicated than that. But processes are, for the most part, definable. Cause and effect is known, and they can be documented. Now, if they can be documented, what I do, you can copy. A company, on the other hand, is not. It's not, a company isn't a whole bunch of processes strung together. Right? It is the interplay between all of the systems, all of the processes, all of the people in the organization. This interplay is so fuzzy and moving all the time. Right? It is a complex adaptive system. Cause and effect is very hard to know, if not absolutely impossible to understand. I pull a lever here, right? Something might happen. I pull that same lever tomorrow, something else will happen, right? Because the organization's in constant flux. Things keep changing, right? And so when you're changing an organization, right? When you're bringing business agility in, it's not about, here's a framework, let's do this, right? The Spotify model or X or Y, it doesn't really matter what it is, right? Whatever you like, you can be inspired by other organizations. You can learn from them. You can get ideas from them. You can go, that's pretty cool, right? We're going to try that as well. That's great. Absolutely fantastic. But your system is different to every other system on the planet. And so when you try something, you're trying it for the very first time. You're the very first person to do what you're doing in your organization. And you don't know what's going to happen because you're the first. I said, you can learn from what others are doing, right? But you need to take that and run experiments. Try. What if you do this? Right? What if we change this over here? What's going to happen? Right? And again, you've got these outcomes in mind. You want to create an agile organization. You want to create an organization that is resilient, that is adaptable, that can serve their customers no matter what the future brings. That's your goal. So you're going to try all these things. You're going to change the organization. So fundamentally, systems thinking is such a key driver towards business agility, because it's the only way. If you don't understand systems thinking, right, you will fundamentally misunderstand, right, how organizations exist and how to change organizations.
Can we say, is it connected with PDCA loop, plan, do, check, action? So you can collect one from the other company. Also, you can test it. If it works, you can you can try to adapt it. If not, you can drop it.
So PDCA or PDSA.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, like everyone says Deming. So they say PDCA is the Deming-Shewhart cycle. No, it's the Shewhart cycle. Deming hated PDCA. He didn't want plan, do, check, act. He wanted plan, do, study, act. And so I remember when I was writing my very first book, I was speaking with the estate of Deming because I wanted to use some of his material, and I'd made that mistake, and I got corrected by the estate of by the estate of Deming. It's like, you cannot say PDCA in association with Deming. It's not his. He hated it. It's plan, do, study, act. No.
Great.
Anyway,
I think I will use study.
But you are correct in that plan, do, study, act as a model of experimentation, trying something. All right, think about it, do something, look at it, learn from it, study it, right, and then respond, act. Right, that is a cycle. Right, there are other cycles. Colonel John Boyd's OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. And this is from the US Air Force. Observe, look around you. Orient, position yourself, right? Decide what you're going to do, then act. Right? And of course, if you're flying an airplane, especially like a military airplane, if you're going to engage in combat, like, you need to be oriented, like you need to be oriented towards where you, like, what you might do before you make the decision to do it. Because if you're pointed over here and then you make the decision to do something, well, you're not in the right place to make that decision. These are tools. These are tools to help you look at and experiment with systems. I will also point out that there are challenges with those approaches as well, because in more chaotic systems, you can't actually plan. So the thing with PDSA is what you're planning, you're thinking about, okay, what are we going to do? How's it going to work? All right. Then you're going to do it. Then you're going to see, did it follow the plan? And then you're going to adjust, act accordingly. Sometimes the planning comes after the acting. And so if you look at, say, how Cynefin is defined in terms of complexity theory, and there are other complexity models other than Cynefin. I'm just a little bit more familiar with Cynefin than others. But probe, sense, and respond. Right? You've actually got to try something. Right? You act first. Right? And you see what happens when you act, because you don't know what happens if you're going to pull that lever. And let's say you're a startup. Right? You're a brand new startup. You don't have a customer history to know that they're going to buy something. You're going to go, you know what? We're going to make a bet. Right? We think they're going to buy X. So we're going to build X and try and sell it to them. So that's the act. Right? And then we're going to see, did they buy it? Right? No, okay, these people bought some of it, but they didn't. So, okay, we can adjust accordingly. So that's why MVP, like if coming from lean startup, is an interesting model as well, because lean startup really talks about a minimum viable product. And I will admit, I don't like the term minimum viable product. It has led to a lot of misunderstanding. But in concept, the idea of, all right, what is the quickest way we can test that a customer is going to buy something? Right? What is the smallest unit of product that we can build that we can test, we can experiment with our customers to say, will you buy this? Because again, this is a unknown domain. You don't know how they're going to respond. You could ask them, right? But and I know from personal experience, asking people is a bad form of market research, right? The very first time we did the Business Agility Conference, I asked on LinkedIn, it's like, hey, if we do this conference, would you turn up? 200 people said yes, they would turn up. Not a single one of those 200 who responded to that poll bought a ticket. We did eventually sell we sold tickets, like the conference sold out. But just because someone says that they'd buy something doesn't mean that they will, right? So you have to act, you have to do something in the market and then see how the market responds. But what you can't do is spend 5 years building a product, launch it, and then assume it's going to work. Right? That's a waste of money. Right? That's why the minimum is such an important part here. Probe, minimum viable product, all of these concepts. Yes, PDSA is great if you can think about it and you can go, okay, we're going to do this, right? And did it meet our plan? But there are other cases where you can't plan. You just have to try something and then go, what happened? And that is also legitimate. Both approaches are valid.
Okay. And also my other question, maybe before the question, we have 18 minutes. Also, if our attendees have a question, they can write on chat and we can try to answer them. And my question is about leadership, because we are always talking about leadership. So if you try to connect the system thing, if you want to change system, you have to change the culture. Maybe not directly to culture, but if you want to touch the culture, if you want to change the culture, you have to start the top management with executives. So what do you think about agile leadership?
I love how we put the word agile in front of everything. But leaders are a fundamental or a fundamentally large influence over the culture of an organization, over the behaviors of an organization. We recently built a behavioral model of business agility. Oh, recently, it's like a year and a half old now. And I think it's like something like 50 57 or 56 of the 84 behaviors that we've identified that are necessary, that Agile organizations have, are leadership behaviors, or behaviors expressed by leaders, I should say. What makes that really interesting is when we look at how leaders are trained, they're not trained in agility at all. Right? And that's true across the board. And that's true for me personally. So I told you my personal story. When I became a director the very first time, right, I had, in all fairness to me, I had this assumption that I could do the job because, like, it's like, I know business intelligence. I can do this. I know data warehousing systems. Right? I must be of course, I'm really good at what I do. So therefore, I must be good at being a leader, being a manager, being an executive in this space. Right? The truth is, I wasn't. Right? In fairness to me, I was then given no training. Right? And there was a study by Career Builder a couple of years ago that says something like 50. I don't know, was it 56, 57% of managers receive no training when they become managers? There's this assumption that when you're a manager, it's management is easy, right? But it's not, right? It requires skill and training. Now, I know we're talking about leadership here, and I will just caveat and say not all leaders are managers, but all managers should be leaders. So leadership as management as a subset of leadership. But that's true, again, of anyone in a leadership role, whether they're a manager or not. We do not receive training. We do not teach people how to be leaders or managers or executives, not properly. And then the training that is given is rudimentary at best. We're about to run I can't say that. We're about to run a research study that I can't talk about, that's going to be looking at some facet of management education, and just watch this space. But we are also running, sorry, I almost said something that I'm not allowed to say just yet. But look at what managers are taught. Look at MBA programs. Right? Most MBA programs are teaching management theory from the 1980s. Right? Look at the courses given to company directors. Right? Company directorship classes don't teach agility. They teach fiduciary management, and don't get me wrong, that's important. But if I'm on the board of directors, I should be caring about, will our organization survive the next 10 years, not the next 6 months? Right? My fiduciary responsibility as a director means that, yes, I do need to care about the next 6 months, right? Which is where your financial reports are important, those board papers that say how many widgets we sold this quarter, right? But truly, I should also be caring about the customer of tomorrow. Are we, as an organization, going to be here in 10 years? That's part of my fiduciary responsibility. But none of the company directorship courses around the world teach that. Right? I know, because I've looked. And if anyone knows of one, tell me, because I've not found any, and I've looked in multiple countries. Right? Because we're trying to find evidence of board level agility for some other of our research, and it's really hard to find. There is some, yes, but it is not much. Right? But sorry, in terms of leadership, we have all of these 2-day Agile leadership classes, and business leaders aren't attending them. Right? They're being taken by Scrum Masters and Agile coaches who want to learn, and that's good. Because eventually those Scrum Masters and those Agile leaders, some of them are going to be business leaders themselves. They're going to be put into those executive roles. And so they'll bring with them that agility. But there's a generational change happening. That agility is coming very naturally, whether someone attends a 2-day class or not. I look at my daughter, right? And I look at the way that she just easily adapts to all the things that are happening around her, much, much better than, well, you and I probably do, and certainly much better than others in our generation are. And so I think agility as a generational change is going to be a big thing. And as the next generation of leaders emerge, agility is going to be, we're not going to be talking about agile. It's just going to be how we are, how businesses are. It's how they exist. Question is your organization going to survive the next 10 to 15 years before that generational shift comes into play? So yes, leadership is vital, fundamental, but people aren't learning it. Organizations aren't teaching it. Institutions aren't teaching it, not properly. And so there is a major gap between what is needed and what is happening.
Okay, and you mentioned the Agile coach. I want to ask a question about Agile coach. My question is, as I know you are publishing state of Agile coaching reports. So let's talk about the 2022 report. What's the biggest, how can I say, what's the biggest maybe challenge or maybe your tips about that report?
So agile coaching as an industry continues to grow. There are more and more agile coaches. The skill sets necessary for agile coaches is, how do I put this? Agile coaches should have a bias towards learning, a bias towards becoming better. One of the things that we see, unfortunately, is that agile coaches at 1 year, right, spend a significant amount of their time learning. Agile coaches with more than 10 years experience spend a significant amount of time learning, but it's a U-shape, right? After 1 year, coaches stop learning, they stop developing. And then after about 7, 8, 9, 10 years, it goes up again. And so a 1 year agile coach and a 10-year agile coach spend about the same amount of time investing in their personal development, their professional development, than as each other compared to everybody else, which is really interesting. It's you've got this whole what's that saying? It's a wise person knows they know nothing. It's like at a certain point as a coach, you're just like, it's like, I need to get back to learning because I now know what I don't know. So now I need to go and learn it. And there's this unfortunate arrogance that sort of happens in that middle intervening point where a lot of, and I'm not saying every coach, obviously, there's standard deviations across the board, but a lot of coaches in that middle ground, it's like, I'm making good money. Companies like me. I'm making a difference. Yeah, I'm good. So there should be a sort of a lack or an unwillingness to invest. And we see that a lot as well, just in the way that agile coaches are engaged. A lot of them are independent contractors or hired by or engaged in small consulting firms where I could train. I could go on training. I could do some professional development. I could become a better coach, but that's going to take away from my billable hours. And if I'm independent, like I have to pay for the training and I'm losing money because I'm not with a client. If I'm with a consulting firm, then I'm not making my billable hour targets because I've got like a 90% utilization target or a 95% utilization target. Or in one organization, 103% utilization target, and I do not know how that happens. But that's a different matter altogether. So there's this sort of, it's the tyranny of success. I think about how much I was willing to invest in my own education, right? And how much I was earning at the time when I was younger. And it wasn't a lot, as in I wasn't earning a lot, but I was investing quite a lot in my own education. When I started earning more, I theoretically, I could take 2 days off. I could take a week off and I was still 10 times better off than I was 5 years prior. But somehow because I'd achieved it hurt more to take the time off, even though at the end of the day, I was actually in a better place. And so people stopped learning. And so that's one of the biggest disappointing findings from the standard Agile coaching is just how like the drop off in personal development that coaches have, because coaches should. The whole point of coaching is that you have a learning growth mindset, which means you kind of got to learn.
I want to ask a question in this part. Learning means, for example, learning from frameworks or learning from experiments. What do you think
Oh,
about?
I don't actually. So we don't care. As far as this research is concerned, we don't distinguish the kind of learning. A 2-day class versus trying something that you've not done before. They all class as learning. It's just unfortunately most organizations aren't quite there yet. Oh, sorry. Most coaches aren't quite there yet in terms of willing to invest.
Yeah,
Because it's an investment of time. Right? No matter what you're learning or how you're learning it, it is an investment of time. That is actually, you know what? I'm gonna step back because I'm going to talk about something very important, not just about Agile coaches, but about everything that I've spoken about: management, leadership, business agility, right? Life. One of the key skills that I think we do not teach people, one of the most vital, fundamental skills, is the skill of managing tensions, polarities, right? Dichotomies, optimize versus sub-optimize. So how do you balance attention? You cannot have everything. Right? Like time for me is my problem. And every day I need to make a decision. Am I going to do A or am I going to do B? Or in fact, realistically, it's like A, B, C, D, all the way through to Z. Right? I can choose one. And so I've got to balance that tension as to what am I going to choose? I can't choose not to choose. Well, I can, but that would actually be a bad decision. So as a leader, as an Agilist, the skill that I need to have is learning how to go, all right, today, this is my priority. This is the tension I'm going to prioritize. Tomorrow, it's going to be a different one. And with coaches need to learn how to balance those tensions, right? Between the time spent learning versus the time spent helping a client, right? Slow down to speed up. That's a tension. Everything in life is about balancing tensions. And I don't think that's a skill that people learn, not properly.
Okay. I have 3 questions. So I have 2 questions, but Özgür asked a different question. What are the reinforcement points to quantitative business agility perception in different industries, organizations?
Okay, so that's a good one. So business agility happens when you have behavioral change. Right? If an organization acts with agility, they have agility. They also should note that an organization is going to have multiple levels of agility simultaneously, and that's okay. But there are some levers that you can pull to reinforce agility. I don't have time to go through everything, but let me give you one, and that is measurement. OKRs, KPIs, whatever you want to use. Most measures do not promote agility. We're measured on how many widgets did you sell this quarter, right? Or how many widgets did you produce this quarter. We need to, there's an old saying, you get the behavior that you measure. So if you're going to promote agility, then you need to change people's measures and promote customer centricity or employee engagement. You need to start promoting other values through those OKRs or those KPIs and those goals that you're setting for people, beyond just how many widgets did you create and or sell. That's one of the most powerful reinforcing points that you can create in an organization, changing their measures.
That's
Your
great.
measures.
And also, my last question is my standard of end of each webinar. What's your suggestion for the leaders, organizations? Maybe 3 suggestions for the leaders, organizations, agile coach. It doesn't matter. Can you share your suggestions?
Yes.
About,
All right. So suggestion number 1, and this is more about inspiration. Just be open, be mindful of what's possible. Your agilists, your agile coaches, your scrum masters, you know what agility looks like in your setting, in your context. Be mindful, be open to the possibility and to the reality that agility is much bigger, much richer, much deeper than building a product in technology. That's not to denigrate building a product in technology. That's fantastic. It can go much further. Right? Just be inspired by what's possible. Second, right? I never want to hear the words, "Oh, that won't work here ever again." Right? Because the truth is, I've got case studies from every industry, from every country, from every kind of company. You want business agility in a mining company? I've got it. You want case studies in a factory in India? I've got 3. Right? You want it in healthcare, med tech. You want it in retail, in strategy, finance, marketing, operations, audit, law. We literally had 2 speakers at the Business Agility Conference talking about Agile in law. So I don't ever think, oh, that won't work here. And if you can't change your company, then change your company. It's that old adage. Right? If you can't make that change, it's maybe time for you to move on to find an organization where you can. Right? But it can work everywhere with the right attitude and the right mindset. So the third point that I want people to really come away from is that it's not about the frameworks. It's not about the practices and the processes. Those are tools. Those are great tools. Use them all, learn them all, right? And learn more. DevOps, design thinking. There are techniques dating back 60 or 70 years that I'm still using. Most of the lean stuff is from the 40s. Servant leadership, the Greenleaf Institute, stuff around servant leadership, that's what, 80 years old now, if I'm getting my maths right. A lot of these things aren't new. Learn all of the tools, have all of the tools at your disposal, because they're all good. But your organization is a complex adaptive system. Use those tools to make a better organization, but don't assume that the tool is the solution. The tool will help you achieve the solution, right? And tools plural, because you're going to need more than one. Right? So look at it as a system. Look at it as a complex adaptive system and make a difference.
And the last note, do you want to share some information about Business Agility in conference will come in next year?
Please, yes. So we're an independent, we're a research organization, we're a publishing organization. Check out our website, businessagility.institute. Become a member, access our research, our publications, subscribe to Emergence, which is our magazine, which my green screen's not coming up really nicely. And we have our conference in New York in in April next year. So please come along to that if you want. Right? We are here for you. We're here to help you achieve your purpose, no matter what the future brings.
Great, many thanks. And I want to say thank you, Evan. That was very great. And also that was very helpful webinar for me, also for attendees. And I want to say thank you again. And maybe we can do in the second round together, because I have lots of questions, theory of constraints, different type of topics. Maybe we can set the next one in a couple of months.
Let's do it. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you for listening. Reach out to me if you have questions.
Thank you. See you. Have a good day.
See you all.